Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military with Summary channel, and this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to discuss several statements and events that took place in Ukraine, United States of America and the European Union that will allow us to understand what exactly is going to happen next. And first let's talk one article that was published by the Financial Times. Trump administration seeks Ukraine to revise mineral deal, expanding economic demands on Kiev. Two high-ranking Ukraine officials told the newspaper about this. Washington insists that Kiev agreed to more detailed provisions governing control over the joint investment fund. The United States also allows for the possibility of including a nuclear power plant in the deal. The American side has not yet presented official new conditions but is actively working on a more extensive agreement. The Ukraine government is concerned that pressure from Washington could force Kiev to accept unfavorable conditions. Ukraine is seeking a step-by-step discussion of the deal without mixing the minerals and power plant issues. However, the US request raised concerns in Kiev. So the thing is that currently the United States of America are interested in two vectors, in two, let's say, waves how to develop the situation. First, the mineral resources. But when talking about mineral resources, this is a very long-term project, and nobody knows for sure whether the United States of America or the Republicans or anyone else who has connections with Donald Trump or the current administration of the United States of America will be able to get some interest from the US, from Ukraine mineral resources in the future, let's say in 5, 6, 7 years. And this is exactly the timings that companies, different companies in the world requires a need, let's say, to extract resources, to find them first of all and then to extract them. So this is the first thing. So that's why the United States of America decided to change their plans, and they decided to get fast money. And when talking about fast money, we're talking about, of course, energy facilities, different infrastructural objects of Ukraine that can be used by the United States of America to start earning money today, not in years, not in 10 years, but today or tomorrow. Another important piece of news that tomorrow on Monday, Ukraine will present the US in Saudi Arabia with a list of objects that Putin cannot strike. These technical negotiations will be led by Defense Minister Rustem Umerov. This is a very important thing because we need to understand how exactly the United States of America can promise or to give guarantees to Ukraine that these or that object of the, let's say, infrastructure of Ukraine that is in this list would not be attacked by the Russians. So the only way how to secure them is to include these objects, all these objects, into, let's say, this deal, not like mineral deal, but this is going to be completely different deal. The deal for let's say different facilities and different infrastructural objects of Ukraine. And we see now that currently there are at least one object of energy facilities in this list, and we're talking about the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. So the deal is very simple. The United States of America will take control over these objects, and this is very important because Ukraine at the end is not interested in giving these objects under the control of the United States of America, because if United States of America controls this object, this means that the United States of America gets the main interests from the operating with these stations, with these transportation systems and many other things, which means that Zelensky and his people will not get anything. Of course, the Ukrainians, regular Ukrainians, will get salaries. Most likely these organizations will pay taxes, but when talking about interest and the main profit, this money will be accumulated by the funds of the United States of America. So that is why Zelensky is not interested in this deal, but he doesn't have any other option because the Russians will continue bombing and attacking them, and then nobody will get anything. So that's why once again tomorrow, the Zelensky team will provide a list of objects that Putin cannot strike, and most likely Trump administration will use this list and they will try to expand their mineral deal on this list as well, which will means that the United States of America will control them. It's not going to be like something like an ownership of the United States of America, but United States and maybe created fund will control all these objects, which will give guarantees to Kiev Kiev and Zelensky that they will not be attacked by the Russian Federation. So that is why Zelensky seeks for ways how to reduce the number of objects in this list, and we believe that this situation will be accepted by the Russians, because for Russia it is very important to slow down the money flow on the territory of Kiev and Ukraine. And if all these objects will be under control of the United States of America, once again the main interest will be allocated in the fund, but not in the hands of Zelensky and his team, which will reduce the money flow that can support and supply Ukraine army and clashes along the line of combat contact. Now let's move further. Another important statement made by Zelensky. Zelensky doesn't like the idea of creating a peacekeeping mission for Ukraine under the auspice of the United Nations organization, which according to media reports was proposed by France. He stated that the United Nations will not protect us and therefore cannot become an alternative to security guarantees or peacekeeping contingent. The United Nations will not have a mandate to protect Ukraine in the event of a new attack by Russia. Zelensky said, for these purposes, pro-Russian resources published very interesting article. Corriere della Sera stated that if Ukraine rejects the peace agreements, Russia will go further and lay claim to all Novorossiya, including Odessa, Nikolaev, Dnipropetrovsk and Kharkov. That was stated by some Western sources. Another important thing that several days ago we got almost the same article from Moscow. If you remember, one of the Putin's requirements was to force requirements was that Trump should recognize all these regions as a part of Russia. Let's discuss this in details. President Vladimir Putin wants US President Donald Trump to formally recognize all 4 Ukrainian regions that Moscow has claimed as its own, in addition to Crimea, Russians Kommersant Daily reported. In return for recognition, and if it happened in the near future, Kommersant and said Putin would undertake not to lay claim to the Ukrainian port city of Odessa and other Ukrainian territory, most likely Kharkiv, Dnipro, and Kherson and Nikolaev. So this is the situation. So we see that Zelensky doesn't have much time. He needs to make a decision right now in the next several days or weeks, and most likely some decisions he's gonna have to make tomorrow on Monday of the on Monday of 24th of March of 2025. Another important thing, in another important way, how Zelensky wants to find a solution how to reduce the list of list of companies that can be included into the list that will be under control of the United States of America. For example, the European Union is considering using Ukraine's underground gas storage facilities to buy gas from Turkey and Greece for transit to Europe. The plan is aimed at easing the anger of Slovakia and avoiding the need to buy Russian gas. Ukraine will increase gas imports from Greece and Turkey and store up to 10 billion cubic meters of gas in the storage facilities. These flows will then be transported via Slovak pipelines to countries such as Hungary in the winter when supplies are limited. This is very interesting schema prepared by the European Union and Zelensky with the purpose to reduce the list of objects that can be under control of the United States of America. First of all, this article stated and tell us that there are a lot of gas storages in the western part of Ukraine that have been attacked by the Russians massively since the beginning of 2025, and in the late 2024 we have a lot of reports that the Russians attacked the gas storages in the vicinity of the settlement by the name of Stry. The Russians were bombing the city of Lvov, so many gas storage facilities were attacked that Ukrainians used for their own purposes and to storage gas for the European Union. Now Zelensky decided to make a schema. They decided to collect a gas for Slovak and for Slovakia and Hungary in these gas storages, but not to give this gas to these countries immediately, but to keep this gas as long as possible until the end of this year. there, and only during the winter period of time to transport this gas to these countries. What does it mean? First of all, we're not saying that Slovakia and Hungary are allies of the Russian Federation, but obviously sometimes the interests of the Russian Federation of Slovakia and Hungary are the same, and sometimes they work together. So that's why we understand if Ukraine can and European Union can storage this gas for these countries in the western part of Ukraine, this will lead to the situation when the Russians would not be able to attack these gas storages, because in these cases they will ruin their relations with these two countries. So this is very interesting schema. From one side, this schema will reduce Russian possibilities to attack the western part of Ukraine and gas storages in the western part of Ukraine, but on the other side, this situation can lead to the situation when Ukrainians will not have to include these facilities into the list that the Ukrainians are planning to provide tomorrow for the United States of America, which means that these facilities would not become under control of the United States of America. So now we see that countries, the European Union, the United States of America, and the Russian Federation are trying to cut Ukraine into pieces. Ukraine, of course, plays their own game, trying to save as many as possible assets under their control. And now it's just this process, and most likely when the sides will come to the situation when it is impossible to cut Ukraine further, the war will resume, but it's going to be much more powerful war. And several important statements made by the United States of America. For example, today we got very interesting article published, very interesting details that from the interview published by Tucker Carlson. Zelensky has pretty much acknowledged that Ukraine will not become a member of NATO. Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff said in the interview with Tucker Carlson. Witkoff's other statements: the Black Sea ceasefire could come into effect as early as next week. This is very important, but I understand that it is the question of Odessa port, because the Black Sea ceasefire could come only in case if the Russians will understand how the ports of Odessa can be controlled by them, by the United States of America, and how the security guarantees can be introduced. We are talking, first of all, that Ukraine will not use the ports to get weapons from the Western countries. Ukrainian leadership agrees to hold presidential elections. According to different insight, these elections are going to take place in October, and I remind you that according to information we have, Zelensky is not going to extend the martial law after the 9th of May. Calling the latest Trump-Putin talks a failure is absurd. Ukrainian troops are surrounded in Kursk. This is a fact. Russia does not plan to attack European countries. This is absurd. Trump and Putin may meet in the next few months, most likely in May. The central issue of the conflict is the recognition of the liberated territories. We're talking about DPR, LPR, Crimea, Zaporozhye, and Kherson. But we have already discussed this topic. If Ukraine will not accept this recognition, most likely the Russians will continue their offensive operation, and the Russians will give much worse probably proposal from their side, and they will demand the European countries and Ukraine itself to recognize territories of Kharkov, Dnipro, Nikolaev, and Odessa also as a part of the Russian Federation. So everything will be resolved during the next several days. Now let's return back to the line of combat contact and let's discuss what is happening here right now. If you remember, during the previous several days, the Russians been attacking the city of Odessa with a significant number of drones and missiles, and there were lots of explosions. We can see right now in this video that was this is the, let's say, the first video that shows us more or less good picture of things that happened on the 20th of March of 2025. As you can see, the city of Odessa was covered with fire almost completely. There were lots of explosions, secondary detonations. The Russians managed to destroy lots of warehouses, ammo depots. The Russians destroyed lots of things that Ukrainians were using for military purposes and for probably building and creating of additional drones and Navy drones as well. And most likely the Russians managed to achieve some results, but most likely the Russians didn't destroy everything they wanted. And the previous night, between the 21st and the 22nd of March of 2025, 2025, the Russians moved their focus to the city of Zaporozhye. The previous night, the main explosions took place exactly in the territory of this settlement. Here we can see the work of Ukraine air defense. Here we can see lots of explosions. So the Russians were bombing and attacking the industrial zones, the railway stations, and the main purpose of those attacks that took place between the nights between the 21st and the 22nd of March was to destroy arms, warehouses, ammo depots, weapons that Ukrainians were trying to bring to the line of combat contact, maybe somewhere in the area of Zaporozhye, in the Orekhov direction, or somewhere in the southern Donetsk direction. Now let's discuss the most important updates that took place along the line of combat contact. When talking about the Pokrovsk direction, according to information we have, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to secure the village of Uspenovka completely, and according to several very reliable pro-Russian resources, today the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation will confirm this information. Now let's move further. Probably the most important updates are coming from the city of Chasiv, where the Russians are about to finish the battle for this territory. According to information we have, the Russians indeed managed to improve their positions in the Shevchenko micro district, probably the most important district of this stage of battle for the settlement, and the Russians are about to finish the clearing of this territory. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Russians improved their positions also in the central part in this territory, and furthermore, several resources reported that Ukrainians that are currently located in the central part were completely caught in cauldron without any possibilities for evacuation, and the only way to evacuate themselves using through the water barriers, but we understand that most likely this is going to be impossible. So we believe that in the very near future this cauldron would be eliminated by the Russians. Furthermore, we got a very important article published by the Ukrainians who are currently located on the ground. The situation in Chasiv is very difficult. The Russian armed forces continue to push through our defenses at the tactical level. Unfortunately, they are having successes. Once again, this was stated by pro-Ukrainian sources. Literally 2 micro-districts, north central, from the private sector, and 2 villages remain under Ukraine control. Everything else is lost. The only place where the Russian armed forces are still being held back is along the Bakhmut-Konstantinovka highway towards Stupochki. So we are talking about this territory. This is the only stronghold that Ukrainians control successfully, more or less effectively, where they managed to slow down the Russians. But it's just a matter of time, because we understand as soon as the Russians are able to get this line, this stronghold would be captured by the Russians as well, or at least the Ukrainians would be forced to fall back towards the city of Konstantinovka itself, and then the battle for this city is going to start. Now let's move further. Very interesting details we continue receiving from the Liman direction. According to information we have, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their position significantly in these fields. We haven't adjusted anything because, according to different mappers and different military experts, these territories were captured long time ago. But just this morning, the pro-Ukrainian sources confirmed this. Anyway, we see that the Russians continue offensive despite negotiations, despite talks, and many other things. As a result of Ukrainian counterattack, the Ukrainians managed to restore control over a small village by the name of Nadia. This information was provided us by several pro-Russian resources, as for now without any geolocations that can confirm this. So let's wait and see what is going to be next, but maybe in the very near future we will adjust the map in this part in the Ukrainian favor. Now let's discuss the situation in the Belgorod direction. This morning, several neutral mappers have adjusted their maps in Ukrainian favor, and according to different articles, the Ukrainians indeed managed to create a small buffer zone along the border. So the Ukrainians control the forest, tree lines, different fortifications, and the different fields between the settlement of Demidovka and Prelesye. As for the beginning of the 22nd of March, we still haven't received even a single post that confirm Ukrainian control even over a single building or a single street of any of these villages. So the Ukrainians digged in deeper along the villages but without entering them. Maybe in the very near future they will start entering and attempts to attack these villages themselves, but we understand that by the morning of the 22nd of March of 2025, most likely the Russians managed to introduce their forces here, and we believe that Ukrainians have no chances to continue offensive. As for the Suji direction, due to the fact fact that Ukrainians began attacks in this area, the Russians were forced to slow down their attempts to attack in this area, and they were forced to redeploy forces to the Belgorod direction with the purpose to stabilize the situation. So when talking about this area, the Ukrainians managed to save some buffer zone, some security zone between the positions of the Russian Federation and the positions of the armed forces of Ukraine on the territory of the Kursk region, which means that most likely it will take time for the Russians to secure this territory completely. We continue receiving reports that there are still very heavy clashes on the territory of the settlement by the name of Guiva. So once again, up to 4 settlements remain under complete Ukraine control, which means that it will take additional months or 2 for the Russians to secure these territories completely. Most likely the Russians will try to finish this battle by the 9 of May of 2025, but telling the truth, we have some doubts whether the Russians are able to do this. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.